Thank you, and thank you all for being here. So I am the president of the Swedish animal rights organization Djurens Rätt, and I've been the president for 8 years, and that is also how long I have been working with lobbying. But I do have a background within the political science, and most of all, though, I'm just really passionate about not only politics, but also about bringing animals into politics. I am also a board member of Eurogroup for Animals, which is the European umbrella for animal advocacy organizations. And Eurogroup for Animals work in Brussels towards EU institutions. However, this talk we will focus on lobbying on the national level and how you can build up your lobby capacity on the national level. So before we start, just let me say that the first part of this talk will be about theory. It will be a short part. It will be about why we should go to Parliament for Animals. The second part will be how you develop your public affairs strategy, the steps that we need to take. And then in the third part, we will look at the practical tools that you can use to start to bring animals into the national politics. I found this lobbyist attitude on World Animal Net, and I highlighted one word. You can see it. It says perseverance. And I think that is an important word when it comes to working with politics. I don't know if any of you in here go jogging or run, or maybe have run a marathon, but politics is often described as running a marathon. You have to be, committed to it. Perseverance, if you Google that word, it means to continue doing something despite meeting difficulties and despite maybe a delayed success. You might not reach the end goal in a short period of time. So that's why I think that commitment and perseverance is very important, and patience when you work with lobbying. So now we move into the theoretical part. And as you know, today, consumers and corporations, they are very much in touch today. And we can see that when it comes to cage-free, for example. We can see it when it comes to meat reduction. It may be that consumers and corporations are driving the change. But the importance of politics, what is that then? Yes, politics is what will formalize that change in some areas. And also, politics is important because politics is what will set the framework for example, if corporations are going to be able to set higher standards for animal welfare. It's politics that creates that framework. And I'm showing you just one scientific article where they looked into the difference between consumers and citizens. And just shortly, it's about, consumers, they make choices when they're at the store. They have to make so many choices. Whereas citizens, they can act on their values. And for most citizens, animal welfare is really important. So that's also why citizens and consumers are different. And the conclusion of this article is that in order to protect animals, legislation will be needed. Just also a few words about a book that I read that I thought was really interesting. So it's called The Political Turn in Animal Ethics. And that is a new, it's like an emerging field within political science. These political scientists, they argue that although moral philosophy has been very important for the animal rights movement as such, they have failed, or they have not been able to present the concrete, doable proposals that will change the society for animals. And they also say that in a world that is non-ideal, we need to work with non-ideal theories. So animal rights in philosophy, that's an ideal theory. That's the world how we would like it to be. But we're acting in a non-ideal world, so we need to have pragmatic proposals that are actually doable, that can function in this world. So that is just really briefly about the political turn in animal ethics. Then we will move from that first, just theoretical framework, to the public affairs strategy, because this is something that can be the foundation for your work with politics and for your work when you want to bring animals into politics. We, at my organization, we have been doing this for many years, but for a few years ago, I started to feel that we have sort of reached as far as we could. Like, we needed another take, another view on what we were doing. So then we worked with a public affairs agency to further develop our strategy. But it's not, you don't have to work with an agency to develop a public affairs strategy. You can do it yourself. There are just certain steps that you will need to consider. And then, you know, when you've done it for some time, you've been working with lobbying, then you might feel the need to actually bring in an agency to further refine the work that you're already doing. So the foundations, that's where we start. So first, it's about making the analysis, to try to see what are the political processes, what's happening in society, what issues are on the agenda. And if you are familiar with working with a model like the PESTEL analysis, you can use that. It's a model for actually bringing in what's going on in society, what technical innovations are there, what political processes, what's happening. And when you have written down that analysis, take it out to someone who is not inside of your organization, who might, you know, just be interested in animal welfare, and try it on them. It's good if they themselves are within, you know, a politician, or if they are a journalist, but someone who is working with the society, and see if they have things to add to your analysis. Then you have quite a good foundation to work from. And the next step is to look at yourself. So how would you like your organization to be perceived? What should be the role and the identity of your organization? And you write that down. And then you go out and you ask some people. You may ask random people in the street, you know, do you know about my organization, and what do you think when you hear this name? And if those two answers overlap, then that is good. If there is a gap between those answers, that should also go into your strategy, because how your organization is perceived will have an impact on how successful you will be when reaching out to politicians and also other decision makers. Then we start to move into the actual work that you want to achieve for animals. So you have to choose your topics. And I would say I think we all know more or less what topics that we have, and we usually have quite many, because there are many areas we would like to work with. It's good to try to narrow it down, also because there's only a limited number of politicians, and there might seem to be a big number of politicians, but there are only a limited number of relevant politicians that are on the right committees, so politicians that you actually can work with. And you don't want to overwhelm them with a whole range of topics or issues. So pick maybe 3. Ask yourself, for each of these topics that you want to work with, how relevant are they? Is there an opinion for or against it? Also, you know, what are the factual chances that we can succeed? Not saying that you shouldn't pick topics where you can't succeed, but you have to be aware also what the chances are. And then really important also, how does this relate to the identity of your organization? How important is this topic, for example, for your supporters or members? So those are the first steps when you think about the topics. And I will show you now the 3 topics that we picked. So the first one is transition to animal-free research. And I will tell you how we decided to work with these topics, also not to cause the overlap, so not to have to come to the same politicians with the same topics all the time. So the transition to animal-free research. There's a topic where politics must lead. So this must come from the top and down. And it's a topic where you want to reach out wider than to just the animal welfare. You want to reach the committees that work with enterprise, innovation, education. So it's a way of reaching new ministries and new politicians. Then second topic was phasing out fur farming, which is a purely animal welfare issues in many ways. And by contrast, this has to come from the bottom up. So that is very much a public campaign, but also scientific expertise, which you need in all the topics. But with fur farming, we identified scientific expertise and working with authorities as an important part of it. And then the third, meat reduction with 50% by 2030. That is also a topic that politics is not likely to take the lead on this, at least not on the national level. But there is great opportunities to work with it, with the municipalities, with the local politicians, with corporations, and with the public. So here you can see then how these three topics, they are all political topics, but the ways that we can work with them are different. So you can reach new politicians, and you don't run the risk of overwhelming the same politicians again and again. Then you have to find a concrete ask, and this is difficult. So you have your topics, but you have to narrow them down into something that is doable, something that is preferably also yesable, something that politicians can say yes to. So, for example, in animal-free research, an ask could be to ask the government to redirect money from animal research to innovation within animal-free research. That could be an ask for a transition to animal-free research. Then, really important is the language. So, to try to think about what language will work with different parties. I have one example from a municipality and a local politician from the left party. He wrote a motion about a local ban on wild animals in circuses. And the Conservatives and the Liberal Party said, yes, we agree with you on the animal welfare part, but in the motion it was written also that circuses are profit-driven businesses or companies. And because of that sort of negative framing about enterprises and businesses, they decided not to vote for the motion. So you have little things wording, like ban, for example, might work very well with the left, but might be a little bit less likely to work with conservatives or liberals, for example. And then the third one, to prioritize pragmatism. And when we talk about animals and animal rights in politics, we need to try to be as concrete as possible and talk about our proposals. And you can think about political parties. They usually, they also have an ideology, they have a vision, but when they talk about their politics, it's usually the concrete, doable proposals that they have that they talk about. And that is how we also can think about bringing animals into politics. When you have all those parts, now we know what we are going to do, but then we also need to see with whom are we going to speak. So one part of the public affairs strategy can be to have a contact program. And this is where you map the relevant stakeholders, you map the politicians, you map the parties. It's really important to think also about if the politicians that you are reaching out to, do they have impact? Can they actually influence? Are they in the position to influence in their party? Are they in the right committee? And not saying that you shouldn't work with just there are many politicians that are animal friendly, but that are not in the position to influence. You should work with them as well, but you have to be aware that you also need the politicians that actually have the position to influence. And sometimes it's not even the politician, him or herself, that have the influence. It might be someone else around the politician, an assistant, for example. So make a plan with over whom you're going to see in the coming year. And even if you decide to work with some politicians more than others, just make sure to keep good contact with everyone, stay in good relations with everyone. And there can be, I know that I'm not going to go into details, but we have, as the situation is in Europe now, we have the far-right parties that are growing, and it's good to have also this discussion now when you work with this. How are you going to relate to those parties? And we don't have, there's a lot to say about that, but I think we just leave you with that. It's really good to decide that before. Power can shift quickly, so that's also why it's good to have good relations with everyone. And also, the future can be here much sooner than you think. So it's also important to keep an eye on the next generation of upcoming decision makers, invite them to panels, invite them to speak, take meetings with them. With this, we are almost there. You almost have your public affairs strategy. So this is the last step where you map out your activities. And I just wrote some examples here that are quite traditional lobbying activities. So you can make your plan for the coming year. What activities are you going to do within your public affairs strategy? And with that, you have elaborated and you have built the foundation for a continued lobby work. I always suggest also to keep a log, because as I said, politics, it can be it is like a marathon, and you won't see the successes right away. So you might want to, just write down a log, and then you can see the small steps that you're advancing, and it's also good to see, to check off, did you really meet the people that you said that you were going to meet, and what did you discuss, etc. So that was the public affairs strategy, and then we will look into some of the practical tools that you can use. And these tools are not related to any one campaign. They are just grouped in areas where you can start to bring animals into politics. So we'll start with the first one, which is more like a general political outreach. So you have your clear asks already, because you did the lobby plan, so you have that. We just put our 3 asks into a small, we call it it's sort of a position paper, but it's like a small folder with a short background and the asks, and these are the 3 most important, urgent animal welfare issues that politicians and parties should handle in Sweden. So that's how we present it. So you can see that up there. And then with that, you can easily use that whenever you meet politicians or assistants or other important people for your lobby work. Try to be present. See where do the parties gather, where can you meet politicians, where can you position your issues. It can be part of the unions, it can be the youth parties, summer camps. I don't know, there might be different possibilities in different countries. But try to be there, and you never know, because you might be standing right to the minister, or you might be running into the party leader, and you might have a very, very short amount of time. But if you have your 3 asks, you know what you're going to say, you have your paper, then you have a good opportunity just to introduce yourself and very briefly, and ask if you can hand over the paper, and maybe also ask them if you can get back to them and you can discuss it further. So that's one thing, to be present where they are. And then the next one is to work with motions and written questions, all those opportunities that politicians have to raise issues in Parliament. With motions, you can approach animal-friendly politicians, and you have an issue that you would like them to raise, and just ask them, and say, would you like to pose a motion on this issue? Written questions, just the same. With written questions, you can also see how you're advancing on an issue. So we had, for example, a member of parliament posing a written question in September last year. And the minister replies to the written questions. And the reply was not negative, but it was very neutral. And then we did some actions in parliament during the year, and we reported and kept the government updated. Then we had another member of parliament who posed another question on the same topic in May, and there you could see how the government's position had changed. So it was actually more positive. So that is also a way of, you can also monitor your progress. We are very generous with giving politicians good PR. One, because we want them to know that being an animal-friendly politician will give them, it will be rewarding, and it should give them visibility. But also because the political landscape, it can be quite harsh, and politicians, they get, a lot of negative feedback. So if you can be the positive voice, even if it's just small steps, but try to be the positive voice to reward the small steps that are taken. Then, let's see, there. I want to show, and this you can also, opinion articles. That's that is a great political tool, and you can take it further by trying to find the more niche political channels. So find the papers that are more likely to be read by politicians, the paper that politicians read. I just took this example. That's an article that we wrote after the elections, and it's a checklist for the new government with the most urgent animal welfare issues that the government will have to handle during the coming term. And again, that article is of course based on these 3 issues. So we just have the same asks, the same issues all the time, and try to establish those within each party, within the government. If it is difficult to get in contact with politicians, to get a meeting, you have them in your lobby plan, you know who you want to meet, but you might not get in touch with them. Then see, for a meeting, then see if you can invite them to speak. Because they want to meet voters, they want to be visible. So that can also be a last resort if it's difficult to get them to come to a meeting. Invite them to speak on a panel or a seminar. Then we'll move on to the second area, which is around elections. And here, it is a good idea to monitor what's happening in Parliament during the term. We usually look at what did the parties do for animals? What did the spokespeople for animals within the parties, what did they do during the last term? And then we make a ranking of that. You also want to bring in the other animal-friendly politicians, but here I think it is also important to see one party might have very visible animal-friendly politicians, but that is not necessarily the same as the party actually taking action for animals. So you have to sort of make that difference and see what did the party do, what did the spokespeople for animal welfare do. And then find ways to make your ranking visible. For this election that we had in September, I got in touch with one of the political expert commentators on TV, and I asked him, we have this ranking, would you like to do something of it? And he did, so he showed it on television, which was, of course, very good. Another thing is also, of course, to map what are the parties promising to do in the coming term, because this is what will be interesting for the voters. So we sent out a questionnaire and got replies from all of them. Now, those empty boxes, it doesn't mean that the parties didn't reply. So all parties replied to all questions, but we also decided to point it out to the voters which replies really make a difference for animals. Because it can be difficult for a voter to read like the political language, because sometimes they say a lot without saying anything. So we worked with green lights and smileys. We decided not to work with red lights or angry smileys for the ones that didn't have replies that would make difference for animals. And that is also, we think that animal welfare should be an issue for all the parties to work with. It's an issue that's about justice, it's about equality, so it does have a place in all the parties. And rather than sort of just working with the Green and the left and the Social Democrats. In this case, we would like to find a way to also encourage the parties that are not getting the green lights. So it's more a way of trying to make them to also step up and have a discussion about how they can improve their animal welfare politics. Another thing that is a good way, I think, for laying a foundation for future lobby work is to map the candidates before they have their seat in the parliament. So we sent out a questionnaire to about 1,000 candidates that were running for a seat in parliament. They got a really simple question. The first one was, are you going to work for animal welfare? And then they could tick boxes which animal welfare issues they are going to work with. But just by replying to the first question, if they were going to work for animal welfare, they became one of our animal-friendly MPs, or animal-friendly candidates. So of the 1,000 questionnaires that we sent out, we got back a couple of hundred, and of those couple of hundreds, 61 animal-friendly candidates were elected for seats in parliament. And this means that even before we know many of them, we already know that they have committed to work for animals, they are interested in the issues, and we also have lists over the MPs that are interested in meat reduction. We know which ones are pro fur farming ban. So we have that information, so we can also approach them in a better way. And what I thought was very nice is that some of the candidates, they also use this animal-friendly candidate label for their Facebook pages. So this is number 3 from the Social Democrats, who said, vote for an animal-friendly candidate, and they also made their own captions to it. Then the third area that is interesting to work with is on the local level and in the municipalities. I am aware that it does require a bit of work. It depends on how many municipalities you have. It can also be done, you might, in some countries it might be more natural to work with the regions, for example. But it's just the idea of mapping what steps the municipalities have taken for animals. And here, I think that, the food issue is, for us at least, a good one to work with here. So we started off with mapping which municipalities had gone cage-free. And this year we're doing a little bit more of an ambitious mapping, where we're also asking them about what kind of chicken do they buy? Did the pigs that they serve in the school canteens, did they get to be outside? So we have a more extended mapping of them, with the aim of being able to elect the most animal-friendly municipality. And then there will be some municipalities that rank really low, and for those we have prepared second steps that they can take to improve. And also for the municipalities that get a good rating, there will also be some steps how they can improve even more. So that's one way you can work on the local level. Then the fourth area that is really interesting in order to both bring in animals into politics, but also to connect to the wider society and connect to other organizations in civil society, is to build alliances. I was doing the lobbying work for meat reduction, and I was feeling quite a little bit lonely, and I didn't know what other organizations were doing. I didn't know if there were any chances that we could get together, but it just seemed that a lot of organizations were doing things. So we had a first meeting with 3 other organizations that were climate environmental organizations. And the first thing we did was just to see, okay, we know that there are lots of differences between how we work and what we ask for. But can we find one common goal just the minimum thing that we can agree on. And we could. So we agreed on meat reduction with 50% by 2030. And that was the one thing that we had in common. So we stick to that, and we don't. We of course you have to compromise always when you work in an alliance, but it's important to have your common goal. So we're still working. In the beginning, it was really informal. It is still an informal sort of, I wouldn't even say coalition, but it's just an informal group that meets and that updates each other. But I will also show you some examples of concrete actions that we have taken. The second one is to think about, is there someone else that can lobby from another perspective? So when we started this first meeting with the plant-based lobby group, we were like, okay, but we need someone that can lobby from the business perspective for plant-based. So one of the first things that we did was to start to talk with the plant-based companies that we have in Sweden. So some of you might know Oatly, which is a big Swedish oat drink, I should say, company, and Food for Progress. There's also they produce meat alternatives. So we started to talk with them and ask them, have you thought about starting a plant-based food association? And then it only took 1.5 years until they actually launched their food association. So they are now lobbying from the business perspective. They are all exporting. They are producing Swedish foods. Some of them are exporting to over 20 countries. So they are now getting into politics, and they are also working on the European level with the Common Agricultural Policy. So just to show you some pictures. So up here, that's one of the activities that we did together with this meat reduction alliance that we created with the NGOs. So that's us representing animal rights, but we also have the WWF, we have the Nature Conservation Society, it's a liberal think tank, there's a Youth for Climate, and the consumer organization. And we just made, our own seminars at a big political event. And we also invented a prize for the company at that event that had the best plant-based food. So that was a way of, position our issue and do it together. And the call to action was that we wanted an action plan for a meat reduction with 50% to 2030. And here, let me see now. And here, that's the first meeting that we had with the government. So where the plant-based food companies were also with us. So we arranged that meeting and we made them meet with the government. And that was very successful. And I think that meeting was part of why then the companies decided to start their plant-based foods association, because at that meeting the government actually said, so okay, plant-based food companies, can you come up with an action plan for how the government can support more plant-based food? And here's another picture of the actual plant-based food association as it started. So it's growing now, but we have, that's Oatly here in the middle, that's the alga farmers, there's Food for Progress, and in discussion here with 2 politicians. So those were some examples how you can work nationally, and some tools that you can use to build up lobby capacity. And just to summarize, so it is important to map the processes and get to know the processes. Maybe follow a law proposal, listen to a political podcast, or just follow the news. Be interested in politics. You will learn to understand it, and also get to know the people and try to be mindful of where they come from. So they might be able to walk with you to a certain extent, but politicians, they will also have their power bases, they will have their voters, and they have internal opinions that they need to take into account. And we already talked quite a lot about the concrete asks, so I'm not going to say anything more about that. But it's good to be interested also when you work with politicians. And it's about, you have to convey your ideas, but it's also about listening. And the more you listen, the more you will learn about how it works, and the more you will learn about the language that you should use, the arguments that will work. And the final one is to build alliances, and I think I talked about that, but I think that is a really important way to reach out to the wider society and to, we don't want animal rights to be a separate issue. We want to place animal rights within the wider society. We want to connect it to the wider agenda. So let's just end with a quote. Politics is the art of the possible, that is often said. I think it's also important to remember another quote, which is by Nelson Mandela, that is, it always seems impossible until it's done. So you need to find that balance, find the balance between what is possible and also try to see what are the opportunities to bring in also into politics what's impossible, but connect it to the reality also. That was all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we have time for about 2 questions.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I want to ask a few questions about the topic you already touched. It is maintaining relations with everybody, basically, on the political scene. You probably know that there are many parties that they're actively undermining the democratic infrastructure that is already here. So it's sometimes hard to find good partners. And we have it especially hard in Slovakia because we have basically a Nazi party in the parliament that is still maintaining approximately 10% of votes. And it's considered to be the most radical Nazi party in Europe. They're actually proposing labor camps for the Roma minority and stuff like that. They had this in campaign, so it's quite ridiculous. And the idea was to maintain the cordon sanitaire. So basically, do not touch them, do not support any of their ideas. How would you handle parties like this? Because when you actually engage with them and give them credibility, you are in the long run undermining actually all your possible political campaigning in the future, because you risk dismantling the democratic institutions. How do you approach that?
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And so we didn't go into detail on that, but that is definitely something that, so when we do our public affairs strategy, that is something that we also have to think about. How do you handle these parties? So my organization, for example, we have seen that, okay, so the risk in connecting with those parties is great. So I think you don't have to work with them directly, but if you can avoid becoming becoming enemy with them, but you might not have to work with them directly. And I'm really speaking out of, because that happened in our case, that we didn't we came on a bad footing with one party. And I think that as a golden rule, it's good to avoid that and be aware of the risks. And I know that, for example, some organizations you just have, you're aware of the parties, but you don't approach them, you don't work with them, you don't invite them, for example, to panels. So I think there is a way to find it, but it's something that can really be discussed. And I think it has to be discussed in each organization, also seeing the risks that you are pointing out. Yeah.
Thank you. You spoke before with alliances with the municipalities and what you can do on that level. And you said about the price, you can give a price to a municipality for doing. How do you deal when, for example, the municipality does very well on the egg issue, but they're dealing very badly with strays, for example? That's just. Yeah. So how do you deal with that?
So we decide on beforehand what topics we are going to bring up. So if there is the municipalities that will rank, you will get to see also how they are ranking. So the winning municipality will be one that gets an overall good score. And you may bring in strays, you might want to bring in other issues as well that are not related to food. So it's just an overall score, and then you should be able to see, so okay, so this municipality, they get this score, and then you can see this is what they're doing good, and they're weaker in these areas. So I think it's good to have it transparent, because then they can also see where they need to improve.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.